So I now have the impossible task, first of all, to keep you all engaged after that, and after 2 long but really eventful days of science and insights, to try and summarize everything that we've just learned in these last 48 hours. And so that's not possible, particularly in 10 or 15 minutes. But I have been sitting in the front of this room, literally writing this talk as the conference has progressed. And I'm trying to do my best to integrate what I've learned. Now, I want to start with a video. And many of you know Manish Juneja. He is the digital futurist. He's quite an influencer in digital health. And I just want to show you this video because it's quite remarkable.
So I'm here in London. I'm in between meetings and I wanted to watch the virtual medicine conference that's happening in Los Angeles, 8 hours over there across the Atlantic. So I'm going to try watching in VR in the car. Let's give it a go.
It's not driving.
Samsung. And the sound should be coming through the car's speakers. It's a lady, I can't see her name there.
Face their pain, right?
It's working.
To meet it, to dance with it, to engage with it.
How cool is that?
My second approach is to build up because
where's Dr. Grimes?
while patients...
I can see people in the audience. There's Dr. Spiegel. Oh, he can't see me actually. Oh,
need to wind down. On the other hand, they typically stop
I really feel like I'm here in the front row.
Decreases over time, and they need to keep some sort of physical activity and muscle mass and aerobic health.
I'm at the front
so
of the
that's
stage.
what the build-up part is about.
You can't hear me though.
And I track that over time.
Anyway,
and finally,
focus on watching the talk.
And stigma.
Bye for now.
So first of all, thank you to Samsung and for sitting here this whole time live streaming this. And that's, it's a cute video, but it brings up a larger point. And I want to amplify that point with another tweet that I have been monitoring. And this is from our Digital Health LA, I think somewhere in the room right now. Maybe raise your hand if you're here, because I've been seeing several tweets coming from DHLA over there. One of the special things about VMed 19 is its worldwide reach and representation. My second home is Louisiana, is represented by Dr. Sarkar of Ochsner Health. And in that really remarkable panel yesterday, Korak, who I think is here as well, there he is, pointed out that, he said something to the effect of, hey, I'm just a junior neurologist living on the bayou in Louisiana, sitting next to my, like my hero, Adam Ghazali, and the chief medical officer of Samsung. And, this is an egalitarian thing that I get to sit here on this stage with these guys. And that's really a key point for me in this meeting, is this idea that there's an equal playing field right now. Anyone can contribute to this science. This science is new. This science is evolving. Everyone has a voice in this science. And also, what it points out is the critical need to spread what we're doing far and wide. Ted Fujimoto is right here. Ted is an absolute expert, one of the world experts in education. He has over 100,000 followers, and he was just live streaming Shafi's talk. So Shafi, you were just being live streamed to over 100,000 people by the guy behind you, and you didn't know that. So what I'm saying here is that healthcare VR is going to succeed if we all work together. And this is one of my sort of first takeaway from these first observations. If we all work together, if we all learn together, and if we share what we're doing far and wide. This is a time where the rising tide floats all boats, and I got that feeling over the last 2 days that we're really all in this together. If this is going to succeed, we look back 10 years from now and look at conferences like this and the conversations that we were having. I hope that we've actually birthed an entirely new field of medicine, a revolutionary new field. And I can this year feel it. I feel the momentum building more than ever before. I feel like we're actually rolling up our sleeves and trying to start solving problems rather than just collecting data or conducting another clinical trial. I feel as if we're starting to really move the conversation forward. So we need to keep sharing what we're doing. Now, this was another remarkable moment from this conference. I think most of you were probably in the audience yesterday when Mel Slater, who is a shy guy and is and he's actually quite open about his shyness. He tweeted about how anxious he was about giving this lecture yesterday. And you may have, if you follow him, he literally said that. And this idea that virtual reality could be used to sort of strengthen his courage. And this was an amazing moment in this conference.
And bad mistakes, I've made a few. I've had myself sand kicked in my face, but I've come We are the champions, my friend.
That was amazing. That was amazing to me. I was laughing and laughing, and so was the audience. It was uproarious, actually, that lecture. And what I really felt in that moment was a sense of joy. There was just this joy about that moment. And I kind of was reflecting on that, and I feel as if that was a theme, particularly of yesterday and today to some degree, and to sort of continue this idea of joy, which is not something we typically measure in a clinical trial, but here is a study that Milton Little, our orthopedic surgeon, presented this morning, where he actually did demonstrate statistically that people who are randomized to VR had a much more satisfying experience in the hospital than people who weren't. Now, do insurance companies care? Well, satisfaction is important. Of course, we'd like to see reduction in opioids, and we'd like to see reduction in pain, and we'd like to see all sorts of other resource utilization outcomes improve. But starting with joy or satisfaction is a pretty good place to start. And we heard from Disney, and we talked about yesterday who delights with technology more and has greater expertise in the world than the Walt Disney Company. And we heard yesterday about how they're using their expertise in design and, as they call it, Imagineering, to bring joy to the world. And it sounds a little bit corny, but VR, clearly, if nothing else, VR offers joy, and we need to leverage that like crazy. And that's something that I kind of came away from yesterday, is let's not lose track of that. And as we get into the weeds with all of the specific, sophisticated, hyper-personalized visualizations that we need to continue to think about, we also need to continue to remember that we're giving people, hopefully, if we're doing this right, we're giving some people joy at very vulnerable times in their lives when they're under biopsychosocial distress. So I think if we keep, that's a sort of, for me, a true north that came out of these last 2 days. So we heard a terrific talk yesterday from the incomparable Raphael Grossman, and he showed this cover of Eric Topol's new book, which I am also about halfway through. I think we're all about halfway through it. Seems like a race to see who gets to the end of it. It's a large book, actually. But the subtitle of this book is How Artificial Intelligence Can Make Healthcare Human Again. And I got this sense yesterday from several of the talks that VR is a technology unlike other technologies. It's a technology that, in essence, proves to us that we're alive and conscious beings. It forces us to think very deeply about mind-body medicine, about the distinction, as I mentioned yesterday, between sensations, emotions, feelings, and cognitions, and to understand what those four things mean and how we can manipulate them in a positive way and in a very humanistic way through a technology, through a computer running lines of code with 0 and 1 that can trigger cognitions that are durable and meaningful and profound. And that's a sense that I got from several of the talks. And yesterday we heard about virtual humans from Skip Rizzo and the idea of sort of empathizing with other humans, which are clearly computers and clearly software, but profound interactions. And there were so many examples yesterday that just left my jaw agape at how the software is advanced to the point where we are starting to empathize with one another, with ourselves, with other patients, and patients with themselves. VR offers a dose of empathy. And I think that's another critical learning for me that I took away from many of the talks yesterday, and something we need to continue to keep our eyes on and understand what that means and think about how to leverage that capability as we continue to look at use cases and opportunities. Another theme that came up for me as I, again, tried my best to integrate all of these different talks is reflected in a few different talks. And I just want to show this brief clip to kind of build this next point from Diane Grimala's talk yesterday.
Data from the
So they hear Kabat-Zinn take them through a kind of vocal tutorial, and when their physiological aspects change, so their galvanic skin response, for example, it goes from foggy to less and less foggy over time. The sun comes out and the sound subtly changes from stereo to spatialized.
So hopefully you heard that, but if you recall the discussion, and what she was showing there was that there's this biodata, this closed loop feedback, as Adam Ghazali described it yesterday, where there's biodata being collected and it's driving a metaphorical narrative in this case that is bioresponsive to that individual. And this idea of using this feedback loop to provide a personalized experience. In this case, the amount of sweat, for example, changing how foggy the visual experience is and clearing up as the sweat clears up, providing an exteroceptive phenomenon, going to my talk yesterday, that's actually being driven through interoceptive processes and trying to connect the exteroceptive and interoceptive systems together by purposely tripping up the exteroceptive system and linking it to the interoceptive system with peripherals. So I won't review my entire talk yesterday, but this is a good example of that. And here's another. I've never, for a second here, as an aside, I've never seen anyone in a lecture tear off their jacket to reveal a full-body haptic suit, but that's what happened yesterday with Raphael Grossman, who has a computer attached to his body and is describing how this suit can help him potentially think about how to maneuver his body in space and time during surgery. So extraordinary, but another example of using peripherals and haptics and other types of accessories to continue to expand our ability to activate our exteroceptive systems, not just the visual systems, but all the different exteroceptive systems we have on the surface of our body. And this may be the ultimate example of that. This is quite extraordinary. It looks to me like the Tesla of the brain. I think Adam called it the sensory immersion vessel, and he was clear to point out it's not a chamber, it's a vessel. And now we're at the point with this thing where we have a complete control of the exteroceptive phenomena and can start to really precisely, I haven't experienced it yet, but precisely begin manipulating the exteroceptive processes to drive emotions, to drive feelings, and ultimately, if we do this right, to drive cognitions. And that's what this is all about. So all of these three examples, as I sort of integrate them together, this is how I summarize it. We need to engage all the senses, not just the visual. Thinking about binaural beats, thinking about the auditory, the acoustic experience, the vestibular experience, the olfactory experience, of course, touch and so on, all the different senses, and measure biodata, because by measuring biodata, we're collecting data that our interoceptive system normally collects, but we're able to now collect it and feed it back to the exteroceptive system, so we put VR and its peripherals into that circuit that I described yesterday. This has the effect of supercharging the tech. It literally is supernatural. And that sounds a little kind of corny, but supernatural means we don't naturally have the ability to sit there and objectively monitor, for example, the amount of sweat we have. We certainly know if we're sweaty, but I don't have this superpower to really fine-tune exactly how my heart rate variability might be related to my cognitions. So this is giving us, in a way, a supernatural ability, and I think it's a reasonable way of describing it. Another takeaway for me came from Dave Rue's lecture earlier today. He showed this slide, which is entitled Digital Pain Kit, which sounds torturous. I think it's a digital pain reduction kit. But this is a kit that actually we have been developing here along with a few partners. And the whole idea here is to engage the patient, not just with giving them a headset and running away, but giving patients a whole bunch of materials that engage different aspects of their care, both technologically and also combining this with a digital health coach. And that's part of what we're doing with Samsung in this trial, supported by Travelers Insurance as well, as an aside, where we're assigning a digital health coach to the patients who have been randomized to this arm and have received this digital pain reduction kit. And this is an example of a general concept. I heard Howard Rose say this today as well. We need to move beyond just distraction. We need to start focusing on engagement, engaging the patients with the technology, not just smoke and mirrors distraction, but really thinking about the holistic experience of being a patient and how the technology fits in more broadly with other techniques and other strategies to engage patients. And ultimately, engaging patients is a behavioral health science. There's decades of research around how to engage patients. We don't need to start from scratch. We can learn from the experts that do this. Well, we heard from our patients earlier today, and for me this was an inspiring moment, not just to be able to beatbox with Harmon, but really to sit back and listen to these extraordinary people tell extraordinary stories. And I don't need to relive that for you, you are all here, but I just want to make this point, which is pretty obvious, but one that I think we are still missing, is listen to patients, really listen to patients. What does that mean, really listen to patients? Like, what does that really mean, right? How do we operationalize that? And we have some knowledge about how to operationalize that, and I'm going to show this to you in a second. But I thought I had another slide before that one. But I'm going to show you how to operationalize that, but what I was going to say is in addition to listening to patients, we can also dance with our patients. So this is actually from last night's faculty dinner, and we're just dancing. I think that's cool. So there's Harmon, and dancing arm in arm with Brandon, who clearly is from Tennessee, and to Despacito. And Raphael looks like he's got some moves. So now I want to advance it. Did my advancer work? Did it freeze, guys? Oh, it looks like I see this PowerPoint strip over the top, which means usually there's an alert somewhere on the screen, and you have to usually, there we go, okay, good. I've done this too many times to know what that means. So I was saying earlier, what does that mean to really engage patients? Well, that's one way to engage patients, but that's just a lot of fun. We've actually tried to operationalize what it means to engage patients. And this is a paper, Brandon is the first author, he talked about it briefly in his discussion. You all have an abstract in your handout. You can go online and access the full paper for free. It's open access. This is the results of the Virtual Reality Clinical Outcome Research Expert, or VR Core Consortium, which includes over 20 people, many of whom are in this room. And in this study, or in this document, I just want to point out there's a checklist for how to engage patients, how to empathize, inspiration through empathizing. And this is a concept from design thinking. This is nothing new. We didn't invent this. The whole notion, though, is how do we take design thinking and iterative empathizing and work with our patients. So I want to just point this out, that there is a science to really listening to patients. And we tried to adapt that science to the world of therapeutic VR in this paper. So for those of you that are designers and are creating new content, this is a resource that may be helpful to you. I started yesterday with this, and I'm going to, I think, end with this. I forget, because I made this talk like minutes ago, how many slides I have. I think this is my near last slide. And I presented this yesterday, and I'm not going to go through the framework in detail again, other than to say that this is how I think of the VRX, the VR pharmacy. If we're going to have shelves in the VR pharmacy, we need to start thinking about where do the medicines go, right? I mean, there's a shelf of antihypertensive medicines in the pharmacy, and there's a shelf of anti-epileptic medicines in the pharmacy, and they have different mechanisms of action. And so these are four big categories that have to do with VR's ability to achieve four mechanisms of action. And in the upper left, I talked about VR promoting cognitive flow for high exteroceptive conditions like anxiety and depression, and VR dampening inner pain signals for high interoceptive conditions where there's a focus on the inner world. Then we talked about strengthening self-identity for the low exteroceptive conditions like schizophrenia or dementia, or enhancing healthy body attention for conditions like obesity, or even rehabilitation, stroke rehabilitation, or body neglect. Very different conditions, but all having a little something in common. So the point here is this, as I said yesterday, is the VRX, and really what I want to emphasize is that we need to figure out the MOA. MOA is the mechanism of action. That's something that we all talk about in medicine, in pharmaceutical science. We should be thinking about that in digiceutical science, and virtual reality science as well. What is the MOA? And whenever a company comes to me and tells me they have a treatment for a condition, I want to understand what is the theory behind it. What is the mechanism of action that you're proposing? How do you think it works? What should the dose be? And it's okay if we don't have all the answers yet, but those are the questions anyway, and I think we really need to be bringing the science to this level. So as I mentioned before, the VR Core proposes 3 different types of clinical trials, similar but different from FDA phase 1 through 3 trials, and those are all outlined in Brandon's document. I encourage you to take a look at those. Like any other biomedical innovation, therapeutic VR mandates rigorous science, and that's a takeaway for me as well. I want to end with this, and that's the same exact slide I ended with last year. It is easy in a conference like this to overpromise what VR can achieve, but we must respect that it is not a panacea for grievous suffering. And I think we all know that, but we just need to be careful, in my opinion, early on in this vulnerable stage of developing this new science, that we just stay within ourselves and try not to get ahead. And I think every one of us, myself included, is at risk of overpromising and underdelivering. And I know outside of these walls, there are folks that wonder, what in the world are we doing here? And why would anyone use VR? And we need to understand that point of view and stay within ourselves and just put one foot in front of the other and deal with the science. Do the science. Keep on studying and researching and thinking, how are we going to implement this? Think about that at the same time. But be careful, myself included, to try not to get overexcited about where we are. VR is great. I love it. We all love it. That's why we're here. But let's continue to be careful about how we're communicating around it and how we're promulgating it. And that's just my own thought about it. So with that, I want to end, and thank you all so much for coming. It's been an amazing 2 days. My voice is just about done, and I want to say thank you to all of our faculty, all of our speakers, and for all of you for coming. We're doing it again next year. Thank you. Thank you. And you guys make this happen. We're going to do it again next year. Hope to see you at VMed 2020.